Welcome to r/Malicious Compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter but not the spirit of a request. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story: manager did not care about the batch of chocolate after my warning and was fired. The second story: manager did not inform us about the project and it failed. The third story: a whole neighbor uses our petrol. We fill it with soap water, which destroys his car, heating system, and house. And the first story is: scan all the chocolate even though it's way more than we've ordered? Well, okay, you are in charge. So, I live in Denmark, and while I studied, I worked part-time to have a bit of extra money, because you don't get paid a lot to study. I worked at the main warehouse for one of the biggest Danish supermarket chains for several years as a ware receiver. When a truck arrived, the trucker would unload his pallets on a conveyor belt. I would load his order into a handheld scanner and then start scanning the pallets. Each pallet had a barcode that told the scanner what was on the pallet, last sale date, number of units, etc. If everything matched up with the order, then lasers at the conveyor belt would check that the pallet was stable and that no wares were outside the pallet. If everything checked out, then the conveyor belt would bring the pallet into the main storage facility. Most of the time, I would just need to scan the pallets, maybe remove some plastic or replace a pallet if it had been damaged under transport. Sometimes, though, there would be order problems. That could include wares being too close to final sales date, like we want it when there's 8 sales days left, but get it with only 7, or that we got more stuff than we had ordered. Well, then had to call the purchasing department and check if we were allowed to receive the stuff. If not, then the trucker would have to take it back with him. If we were allowed, then we could overwrite the scanner and the pallet would be taken in. Most truckers would arrive between 13 and 15, so each day a few student part-timers would come and help scanning around that time. I was one of these students, and I would work 2 to 3 days a week depending on my study schedule. The pay was only $15 an hour, so I didn't get rich, but it was nice with the extra cash. Each Wednesday, we would get a few pallets of rather expensive chocolate from Germany. The driver would arrive at the same time as me, and since there were always problems with his barcodes, I always get it. It was alright though. He was a nice guy, if you could look past that he was rather racist towards Germans, and the problem was mostly that the chocolate was a day or two close to last sales day. Since it was rather expensive though, I always had to call Awesome Guy, AG from purchasing department. AG was only a few years older than me, and we had many interests in common, while having many different opinions. So it was always interesting to chat with him. Since AG was in charge of chocolate, and he always came down to double check, so we got our small weekly chat there. Much fun. He always double checked because the chocolate company had tried to cheat us more than a few times, by either sending too old or too much chocolate. Well, when I arrived one day, I couldn't find the normal drive, who for Kinder chocolate. Instead, the chocolate arrived half an hour later, and with a Polish driver from a German company, which made me kind of suspicious. Instead of the normal 3 to 4 pallets of chocolate, he had 33, which is just about as many pallets as you can have in a truck. The first pallet went in without a problem. The next pallet had problem with the dates, as the chocolate was 1 day too close to last sales date. So I called purchasing department, but AG wasn't there. I told the lady who had taken over chocolate until AG came back, let's call her Not AG, that it seemed kinda suspicious with all these pallets. Well, Not AG told me that they had ordered more chocolate than normal this week, and that I should just let this pallet pass. So, I let the pallet pass, but the next pallet also had problems with the date, so I called Not AG again and asked if she wouldn't come down to take a look at it. Not AG told me that she was too busy and that I should just let this pallet through. The same happened for the next few pallets, and each time Not AG just told me to let them pass. On the 5th pallet, the scanner also complained that we were about to receive more chocolate than we had ordered. I called Not AG again and asked her to come down to take a look, and she told me to just scan it all in. Not just this pallet, but all of it. I told her that there were lots of pallets left, and that we had already received more of certain chocolates than ordered, and were pretty close to being ordered at the rest. Like so close that the next pallet would take us over, and that I had to call her each time the scanner complained. So Not AG opened the order. It's something that only the purchasing department can do, and it means that you can scan anything in on the order, and the scanner will not complain. All security functions are taken out. She took full responsibility for this order, and I just had to scan it in and leave her alone. So I did. I scanned the last 28 pallets. The scanner didn't complain. That would normally be 12 weeks of chocolate. I have no idea how much it cost. I assume that was also the reason for them choosing another driver for that shipment. The normal driver would have caught on to it the same way I did, and the chocolate company properly didn't know I always scanned the same order. Not that it did any good, since Not AG refused to take me serious. When I arrived for my next shift a couple of days later, the big boss of the entire warehouse was waiting for me. Big boss asked me if I had asked Not AG to open the order. I told him that I had asked for her to come down and check up on the chocolate, and that she had instead opened the order and asked me to scan in everything. Big boss just nodded a few times and thanked me, then left. An hour later or so, AG came down and told me that Not AG had been fired. The purchasing and sales department was working overtime to figure out what to do with all the extra chocolate. The chocolate on the last few pallets only had 2 weeks left before the last sales date, and we had 4 extra months of chocolate in the warehouse. In the end, the company was able to sell part of the chocolate to another supermarket chain and got rid of the rest by having the longest and biggest chocolate sale in the company's history. The second story is, need a project done? You didn't notify us ahead of time. This story isn't one that happened to me, but to my coworker instead. At the time, I was on vacation, which was much needed honestly, and he told me about it the Monday I came back. To anyone that will probably ask, I did ask before posting this, and he told me to go ahead, since he knew of the other stories I had posted on here before. It'll be somewhat short, so I'll go ahead and begin. So last month, me, my boss, and my coworker had discussed how when it comes to projects related to the plant, especially when networking of any kind is needed, that the IT department is always the absolute last to know. Here's the thing, anytime that a project needs to be done that will require networking, cable ran, ports configured, additional equipment, possible quotes, etc., it takes time and some much needed preparation on our end to accomplish that. The job I work for, network admin at a food processing plant by the way, has always in that position where we've been at the bottom of the barrel. Well, going back to what I was mentioning earlier, my boss decided to hold the other managers accountable of their projects by signing a form that the complex manager agreed on. What is this form for? It's pretty straightforward. The department that has a confirmed project that will require any form of IT support must be coordinated with the IT department prior to their particular project starting. If they tell us ahead of time, we get the groundwork set for their network and let everyone else handle the rest. Shouldn't be hard, right? Well, I wouldn't be here if that was the case, but I promise it'll be good. So every manager in their respective departments came by our office with the complex manager present and signed off each individual copy of the form. We kept each copy in our office as confirmation of their acknowledgement, and for a while things were relatively quiet. We'd get the occasional network drop request here or a quote made for an IP camera there, but nothing too ambitious. But then it happened, and as I've mentioned, this happened to my partner in crime, so I'll tell about it as close as he told me. So last week I was on vacation because my work anniversary was coming up, and I needed to use what vacay days I had left. In that time, he told me that the safety manager had approached him, mentioning that they had already began working on having their office area rearranged in order to accommodate a couple of new hires for their area. Keep in mind also that there was no word, mention, or notice that this was going to happen at all. So going back to what I said earlier, the safety manager wanted my bud to have 2 machines set up, a couple of internet drops set up and programmed, and include 2 Cisco IP phones, 4 monitors, dual monitors for some hecking reason, and all that jazz. He asked the safety manager the following: how long ago is this project in your scope? About 4 weeks. Where will they be seated? Is their power already provided? Not as of yet, but we will be getting power established this week. Why did you wait until the last minute to notify us you need this much work done in regards to networking, asset distribution, and overall setup? I do not really have an answer for that. I just assumed with what you have excess with that you can accommodate. My bud had to explain to him that this was the main reason why other members of management, including him, signed the form. His failure to notify us in a reasonable amount of time meant that his project will be delayed. He then went on to tell the managers that we do have phones, but those need to be configured with an extension that's not in use. Monitors? Well, if you want brand new monitors, those will have to be ordered through our supplier, charged out of his cost center, and still wait 2 to 3 weeks before it arrives. Same can be said about the computers, and even when they arrive, we still have to add them to our domain, make sure all the necessary software is installed, etc. The biggest came from the fact that the office they're in is a bit of a ways out for either one of us to run cabling ourselves. That will require a contractor to come out, walk through where the cable will be ran from the nearest switch to the room, quote out the price, then it'll have to get charged through their cost center. When asked why they can't just cut corners and give him the secondhand supplies, my bud looked back at him and said, "We keep spares on hand in the event we have to swap out machines that are already provided. When requesting new equipment, we have to maintain compliance with corporate policies to ensure that all employees have the necessary equipment to do their respective jobs." He also went on to say that we couldn't cut corners on how networking is done either. It has to be ran with a certain type of cable. It has to be ran neatly and discreet, and it absolutely has to have a 4-port box with X amount of jacks with jack covers as well. Our company's IT policy is a bit too strict for my taste, to be honest, but it makes great compliance ammo. What ultimately happened in the end was all his equipment was ordered. I believe the total was a little over $2,000. Quotes out the contractors to run 2 Cat 6 lines, which they'll have to do on their time. And to top it all off, his new employees have no phones, because they're IP phones, and we gave them desktops with external Wi-Fi adapters and oldish HP 17-inch monitors. To make a long story short, in any projects that everyone has their fair share to contribute, due notice ahead of time can go a long way. The last story is, steal my petrol, pay thousands of euros. Background. So I have an a-hole neighbor and his SH-stained family, who we always had problems with. When I'm done, I'll add some other shenanigans. This included flinging trash onto our side, putting his dog on our side so it would poop there, and at one point, stealing our petrol from our outdoor tank. Now on with the story. The problem. So about 2 years ago, in April to May, we noticed that the petrol in the tank was going down very quickly, even though the amount we used was very little. After a bit of investigating, we found a pipe that had been installed that led to his side of the land. Recently, he got this huge new car that obviously needed a bunch of gas, and it seemed that along with some being used over time, there were huge amounts used every week, so he was presumably filling his car. To stop him, my dad hatched a plan. Keep in mind we could not call the cops on him, as they would do nothing, because his nephew is a policeman, and we live in Greece, so, you know, family ties and stuff. Planning. Since this was during the summer, we waited until he went on holiday. He was quite rich, and then disconnected our house from the pipes, so there would be no chance of him suspecting everything. We kept the charade up until he came back and went back to using our petrol. We noticed a pattern too, when he used our petrol to fill his car. I think every 4 to 5 days, and we used this to our advantage. The revenge. The day before he filled it up, we topped it up with soap water and mixed it around in order to make it petrol color, with any petrol left over, and we removed just enough for it to have the same color. For those of you who do not know, water in the gas tank is a no-no, and it causes a lot of damage that's very expensive. So this completely destroyed his gas tank, and the damage was so great, it was cheaper to sell his car. At that time, it was summer, and so we do not need gas to heat up water. Due to the water in his heating system, as it was plugged into our tank filled with the petrol water mixture, the metal started eroding and rusting or something, and water made it through the pipes, and so it was in contact with the concrete, which made it moldy and weak. A few months later, it made it through the concrete and a piece of the ceiling collapsed, and all the petrol water flooding in. It obviously cost him a lot of money to fix it as well, as the money lost with the car and the heating system. I can only assume it was in the thousands. I hope you guys love these stories. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to know when the new video comes out.